You have probably seen a meme somewhere online that talks about the NIV being the devil's translation, this horrible translation that has removed inspired words from the Bible, that there are 45 or 49 or 51 or 52, nobody can agree, although the real number is 49, verses in the New Testament that the NIV has stripped out and just deleted. Is that even true? Well, no, it's really not. The NIV was translated by a large number of ecumenically minded different denominations, from the Church of Christ to Methodist to Presbyterian, in order to ensure that there was not doctrinal bias, in order to ensure things like this didn't happen, in order to ensure that we had the very best translation possible in 1984, and actually started in the 70s. This committee-based translation really did a really good job of translating the New Testament. But what about these 49 or 45 or 52 or whatever verses? What is the story on this? What happened to them? And so somebody will say, you know, oh, well, turn to Matthew chapter 12, verse 47, and tell me what's there in the NIV. Or Matthew 17, 21, or Matthew 21, 44. Go ahead and take a second and go look those up and see if you can find them there. You're going to notice that Matthew 12 goes from verse 46 to verse 48. You don't see a verse 47. But what you will find is you will find a footnote there that the verse has not actually been deleted. It's not been thrown in the trash can. It's been taken down to a footnote, and it will say something like, some manuscripts, you know, include the following, and it will give you the verse that was there in other translations. Why? Why did the NIV choose to do this? It's the devil's handiwork, or the work of, you know, evil people or something? Why a footnote? The first thing I want to say is that the NIV never deleted these verses. They are there. They're just in a footnote. Why are they in a footnote? The 1611 King James was actually a revision of the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible was kind of the Bible that was used in the churches, and if you look at King James's actual list of rules for the translators, which exists, you can find it online. King James actually gave them lists of things to try to adhere to. It's rule number 1 or 2, it's not on the top of my mind, where he says, basically, adhere to the Bishop's Bible as closely as possible. The King James Bible, 1611 authorized version, was authorized not because it's authorized by God, but because it's authorized by King James, the King of England. In doing so, he gave this list of rules that basically just says revise the Bishop's Bible and revise it as little as possible. Keep it intact as much as possible. So the King James is not an original translation, and if you have a copy of the Bishop's Bible and you have a copy of the King James, you're going to see that they're actually quite similar. When you're reading the King James, you're nearly just reading the Bishop's Bible from the 1500s. So when people talk about, you know, the only version being the King James, would they say the only version is the Bishop's Bible? Or which version of the King James are they talking about? Because the King James had mistakes, it had problems, it had errors, it contained the Apocrypha. Is that inspired? And so, you know, which King James are we actually talking about when we say that? You have to understand where the verse numbers come from. There was a man named Stephanus who created the verse numbers in the 1500s. And the joke was that he was riding on his horse, and every time the horse would hit a bump, he would make a verse number, because sometimes the verse numbers are in really peculiar places and they don't always make sense as to why they are, where the chapter numbers are, why a chapter breaks where it does. And then when the headings came into English translations later, sometimes they put them in really awkward places. Like in Ephesians 5, there's a really awkward heading where it should be before the submission verse, but they put it after, and you miss the whole context of mutual submission coming into husbands and wives. But so when Stephanus made these verse numbers, the verse numbers are set, and English translations use those verse numbers from that point forward. So if a verse number is there on a verse that is not original, and we find that out later on, hundreds of years later, then what ends up happening is you say, well, that verse is not an original verse, and so we take the verse out. You've just removed a verse from the Bible. You've removed it because the verse wasn't there in the first place. Why would the verse not be there in the first place? The King James Bible was finished in 1611. It was translated from manuscripts that were from the 1200s and up. Nothing earlier than the 1200s. So that's all they had to go on. There was a 1200-year gap from when the New Testament was written and the manuscripts, the texts of Greek that the King James scholars were translating from. And keep in mind, they're also comparing to the Bishop's Bible while they're translating to try to keep it as much the same everywhere that they can, which they remarkably did. So when they get into this, they end up including things that are proven by 1200, 13, 14, 1500, 1500s manuscripts. They end up proving they end up with a translation that's based on manuscripts that are only 300 or 400 years old. And in doing so, they included verses that, as we get older and older and more reliable manuscripts, which actually didn't change an awful lot. If you think about it, hundreds of thousands of letters and words, we're dropping out 49 pretty much insignificant verses if you actually look them up and see what they say. They really don't have any bearing on anything. It's not like these accusations that the NIV did this evil thing by removing these verses. There are things like Silas didn't go with them and stuff like that. So when the NIV removes these verses, they're removing verses based on textual evidence, Greek manuscripts, copies that go back to the 2nd century. So we just got 1,000 years older of manuscripts. Now, the first thing I want to say is this actually proves the reliability of the New Testament, because very little actually changed. 45, 49 is actually very little. And these are just mostly just phrases and in a case or two, a few sentences. John 8 would be an exception to that. The end of Mark would be an exception to that. So we actually are proving the reliability of the Bible, not the unreliability of the Bible. Sometimes if somebody's copying a manuscript and they remember a line from Matthew that was in Mark or Luke, and so as they're copying along, they just finish it from memory, and they say this kind comes out through fasting and prayer. Well, the manuscript may only say through prayer, but the other gospel says and fasting, and so they write down both from their memory, and now you have a textual variant, something that wasn't original and something that needs to be actually removed and now footnoted often. So this is how these things happen, and it actually is an attempt, an effort to make our Bibles more accurate, not less accurate. And this is actually an effort for us to have the best text and the best translation possible. So when we hear this whole deal about the NIV being the devil's translation, memes on Facebook about, these evil pagan people who took out verses out of the New Testament and just threw them in the trash. The inspired Word of God has been ransacked by these so-called scholars and, questionable histories and things like that. You need to understand that the 1611 translators, they did with the King James, did the very best that they knew how to do. They actually did a very adequate job. But in doing so, they only could work with what they had. They didn't have manuscripts from 200 AD. They had manuscripts from 1200, 1300 AD, which actually, if you had a 400-year-old book, you'd say that's a really old book. I mean, these manuscripts seem very, very old at the time, but now we have more evidence. We have better evidence. And to put that evidence to work is very important that we do. So you need to realize that when you're reading a King James, you're really not taking use of the best scholarship. You're really not taking use of the best textual evidence that exists now. We have better textual evidence. Just let me illustrate this for a second. So they had about a dozen manuscripts that they worked off of to translate the King James Bible. And now we have over 3,000. 3,000. They had from 1200 to 1600. We have from 150, 200, up. So we have better evidence. There was, and one of the things that you'll find in the end of the King James, if you look it up, is the very last verses that ironically talk about not adding to or taking away from the words of the Scriptures. Erasmus, who was one of the main textual critics in the 1500s, who the King James Bible, used some of his work off of, he didn't have the very last page of the book of Revelation. He had no manuscript that contained the last words. And so what it appears that Erasmus did was he went and found some Latin manuscripts, and he backwards translated from the Vulgate to Greek. He created a Greek manuscript of the last words of the book of Revelation. And in doing so, the Vulgate, it actually has flip-flopped the book of life and the tree of life. And so Erasmus took what he had in Latin, and he translated it into Greek, and he actually introduced, having no share in the tree of life or the book of life, he actually flip-flopped those two things, and I'll show you that on the screen so you can see that. And in doing so, he created a Greek manuscript that there was only one of. It was his. There was no textual evidence for that rendering, that inclusion of that phrase in any other text, as we found more and more and more text. That's never shown up anywhere else. And so, the King James actually contains things that are not textually proven. It's very small. That's not a hugely significant faith-shattering thing, but it does dispel the rumor that the King James is like the only translation that could possibly be accurate and true, because it actually does contain some things that are highly suspect. We're deconstructing some like church conspiracy theories, you know, like Christian conspiracy theories of these things that get said and they get put online about Easter or about Christmas or about NIV or about all these things, and it's just complete misinformation, just fake news. We just got to get over it and move on. We got to dispel the fake information, put out the real information, inform people so that you can make your own decisions. That's what this channel is really about. We want you to make your own decisions. We want you to be informed. We're not going to tell you how to think. We're not going to tell you what to think, but we want to really inform and equip and empower and help you find your voice so that you know what you're talking about. And this is a resource for that. So we're appreciative of you being here. We ask that you share it with a friend. Just tell one person about it. Pass it on. I ask them to check it out. And we'd love for you to subscribe. The subscriber number keeps growing. When we hit 1,500 subscribers on this channel, then we're going to give away a copy of John Mark Hicks's book, Searching for the Pattern. And so it's a wonderful book if you haven't read that. Catch you next time. Thanks for watching, and God bless.